I wanted to see what conditions were like in the camps. I wanted to see what daily life was like. I wanted to see the Turkish approach to the problem. And I also wanted to speak to the Turkish government and the British ambassador, which I did whilst I was out there, and learn what they thought could be done. And there's no easy answers, and there's certainly no answers that don't have a downside or significant downsides to them.
Tell me about what conditions were like and some of the sort of the images that remain in your mind.
I mean, the conditions, I must say, the conditions within the camps were pretty good. And having worked with displaced people before and seen a fair amount of this sort of thing, they were pretty much the best refugee camps I've seen. It's clear that the Turkish government have made a huge effort to accommodate these people. But, you know, at the end of the day, they're not in their home country. They're away from home. The children, they are being educated to a degree, but it's desperate. They're away from home. A lot of them have lost family, friends, and relatives. There's a real dearth of men there. There's a lot of women and children. I was lucky enough to look around a mother's house. The mother and father were there. Actually, he was old, so he had somehow managed to escape, I think. And there were a couple of little boys in there. One was sort of sat in the corner. He was quite nervous. This other lad was in a wheelchair, and he essentially was suffering from a nervous disorder brought on by the conflict. And the nervous disorder forced him, or sort of made him, bite his hands, and you could see all the scarring on his hands and up and down his arms. And the mother was sort of begging me for help. But it certainly reinforced to me that, the UK government has done a lot of good. We have contributed almost £1 billion now in aid to that region. And we are taking refugees from the camps inside Syria, which is absolutely the right thing to do. We need to look at the source of this problem, and we need to have a good long think about what we do about Syria.
So having seen what you've seen and experienced what you've experienced, is what the government's doing thus far, taking 20,000 refugees over 5 years, is that sufficient?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you can always play the numbers game with this, and that will often depend on your political viewpoint. I think the government, at the end of the day, is taking the most vulnerable from the most vulnerable positions within Syria, which is absolutely the right thing to do. But the Prime Minister at the start of this said, the answer isn't taking more and more refugees, and he's absolutely right. It's part of a multifaceted approach to this problem. A key part of that approach is, I'm afraid, doing something about Syria and giving these people a country to go back to.
So what of the future then? We've seen this week Russia conducting airstrikes in Syria. What do you make of that, and what of the future? What is the way ahead?
The Russians getting involved makes the whole thing a lot more difficult. I'm not party to strategic discussions and what's going on at the UN, but it would appear that they are targeting Assad's enemies. And it's clear from, what you see in theatre that, Assad and his behaviour and the way he carried on sort of gave birth to so-called Islamic State. And the idea that he can contribute to a future in Syria, I think, is entirely misguided. And so any support provided by the Russians is a real sort of retrograde step. But it's an immensely complicated and complex situation. I suggest that there would have to be some sort of military response using indigenous forces and perhaps what we would call enablers in this country to give them the skills that we're lucky enough to have, but they don't, such as controlling fast jets and targeting of individuals. But, as to what we do about Syria, I think, there are real challenges, and I think there are no easy answers at all, but we must get our humanitarian response right. I think that's something we've always done well historically as a country, and I think we're on the way to doing that again now.